Hi everyone, welcome along to our What Makes a Good Culture masterclass. I'm really delighted to join today. I'm going to be honest, 24 hours ago I was in Marrakesh enjoying the sunshine and hanging out with my family. So I did have to have a little think for a minute there about whether it was good morning or good afternoon, given the time that my flight landed last night. But I'm really glad to be here with you. I'm really excited to talk to you about what makes a good culture. So today we're going to cover a few different things. We're going to think about this piece first of all about why we should care about culture and what is it really, because I think a lot of the time we get caught in this idea that it's about vibes and just making people happy, and it's got so much more value than that. So I'm going to share a bit about that. I'm going to talk to you a bit about what the research says good culture looks like, and then I'm going to give you some advice around how you think about what a good culture looks like within your specific context. So I'm not going to just kind of quote lots of cookie cutter responses at you today. We'll very much inform and support you to understand what the research says about this stuff, but also be that annoying person who says, you know, there isn't a silver bullet on this. There's a piece about thinking about your own specific context. For those of you who've joined us a few more times, you'll see I'm out and about today. I'm meeting lots of people in Manchester, so I'm doing my own impression of being a news presenter with people in the background. Maybe I should give that man some privacy, should I, and let him get on with his day. So let's get started. As always, we've got our Q&A section, so please feel free if you've got any questions or observations as we go through the conversation today. I've got that up in the corner of my eye, so I'll answer any questions as we go. So for those of you who don't know, just to introduce myself, my name is Paula Brockwell. I'm an occupational psychologist, and I'm the founder of the Employee Experience Project, and I'm a bona fide culture nerd. That's the truth of it. My job is about supporting organisations to really understand what culture is right for their context, for their operating goals and the context they're operating within, and supporting them to prime their environment to allow them to really be able to make that a reality. So I'm excited to share some insights and some practical ideas with you today. So let's talk first of all about why we should care about culture and what that actually looks like. So, well, as I kind of inferred already, I think culture's got a massive PR problem, if I'm completely honest. I think what they told us about this, and I think a lot of the common rhetoric that gets pushed when it comes to culture focuses very much on this idea that if we make people happy, then we'll get business results. And while happy people is important and it's a useful piece, if that's our single end goal, we're not really doing ourselves any favours. And in fact, a lot of the organisations that we work with have perfectly content employees or content colleagues, but they are not displaying the behaviours that the business needs in order to drive things forward. So happiness is part of the equation, but it's not the whole equation, and it's important that we take that into account. So I'm just going to share with you our cultural equation, and I think a really helpful way for you, if you are an HR leader and you're trying to break down that PR issue that comes with culture, a really useful way to structure your conversation on this with your senior leaders. So let's talk a little bit about what culture is and its true value and what it does. For sure, culture drives everyday experience. So how people feel about work, how they feel about themselves to an extent, and the energy that they have to take into the rest of life. For sure, their everyday work experience and their everyday working culture has a direct impact on those feelings. But I think it's important when we look at that experience circle that we don't just think about this idea of, are our people happy? Are they content? But what we also need to ask ourselves is, are they? Do they feel like they understand what is expected of them? Are they clear on what their goals and priorities are? But are they also clear on what good looks like on a day-by-day basis? Because those everyday experiences that people have don't just influence how they feel about work and sure that how connected they are to work, but it directly influences the attitudes that they have about their work. So what do they think they are connected to? Are they ultimately connected to your organization and helping it succeed, or perhaps, as we see in a lot of mission-led businesses, more connected to the mission and trying to drive that individually without necessarily feeling that connection and care for the business? So they might feel perfectly happy at work, but they don't necessarily feel happy within your organization or connected to that, or they don't see that as important. So that piece around purpose and connection is critical, but also people's belief about what good looks like, what they should offer, what in good conscience they need to turn up and give every day, and what they believe the organisation should give to them. So how we experience work directly influences our attitudes and our belief about work, which then drives our behaviour. So experience is critical, for sure. Happier people are more motivated, but also informed people, aligned people are much more likely to have the attitudes and the behaviours that we need to ultimately get the business results that we require. So if we want to link culture to business results, thinking more about behavioural alignment, and are we getting not just the question of are people happy whenever we're considering if we have a good culture or not, but always asking the question of are people demonstrating the behaviour that we need for our business to succeed, and can they do that in a sustainable way that allows us to continue to succeed over a period of time is really critical. So starting to think about how we define good and what that actually means is a really empowering piece of starting to leverage culture in a way that is much more powerful and much more impactful for us than just being caught in that horrendous you said we did cycle where we're trying to just get people to a place where they feel like we feel like people are happy or they trust us or whatever it may be. As I mentioned, an important piece of the equation, but not the whole equation. So if we really want to think about the value of culture then, I think having this conversation with our leaders is an interesting one. So often when I talk to leaders, particularly those not within HR, they will either say to me, oh, we don't really have a culture, or we have a really great culture. And I always, pretty much always, to be provocative, ask the question of, well, do people behave in the way that you need them to? Do people show up and behave the way that you need? And a lot of the time people will say no, or they'll say, we try to have a really good culture, but our people aren't happy. They still aren't happy, whatever we do. So trying to broaden that conversation out of this kind of, I often use the analogy of, for those of you who have kids, you know, that kind of horrible situation that you get caught in the school holidays where they tell you that they're bored and everything you suggest isn't acceptable. I think a lot of businesses, when they really start to invest in culture, get stuck in this place of trying to make people happy, when actually happiness isn't something that we can deliver for other people. Contentment isn't something that we can deliver for other people. Culture is about alignment and teamwork and getting everyone to play their role towards creating a system that enables us to succeed, enables us to deliver, enables us to feel proud and valued. So shifting our definition on that, I think, can be quite helpful, and it can be really useful to drive those conversations with our leaders around, we're not just trying to get you to turn everybody's frown upside down, we're trying to help you unlock the behaviours that the business needs so that people feel happy, healthy and connected enough to turn up and do the stuff that we need them to do day in, day out to allow this business to continue to deliver or continue to grow or continue to innovate, whatever it is that's important for your particular context. So what does the research actually say about culture? Well, I'll let you have a quick read of this slide and see what you think. But now, what is quite interesting is I, every now and then, just go digging to see what further research there is on this. And you can see that this paper is actually from 1992. Really, because the culture research is a bit rubbish, if I'm completely honest. A lot of it focuses much more on how do we describe models of different types of corporate culture, how do we give typologies on things, without doing the tricky work that you can see here of really picking up and doing really detailed studies of how different modes of culture influence performance and outcomes around things. Now, this was a beautiful study because it was done over an 11-year period, so a lovely longitudinal study, which as psychologists we absolutely love because it allows us not just to capture a point in time, but to understand the longer term effects of the particular things that we're measuring. But you can see here that there was a huge difference for those that had strong performance enhancing cultures versus those perhaps that had cultures that were less aligned to the performance goals and priorities of the organization. They had 5 times less revenue growth, nearly 9 times less, I'm trying to do the maths really quickly in my head, 9 times less kind of increase in organizational value, and well, ridiculous, isn't it, in terms of the net income growth in there, in terms of the profit ultimately that the business is getting, over 756 times stronger for the businesses that had culture that was performance aligned. So this is a vibes thing, this is an engagement, this is a connection thing, but oh my goodness, is it a performance thing as well? And if we leverage it well, it can be really helpful for us to think about it in that way. So I'll pause for a second. If you want to grab a screenshot of that, you can do. We will send you the slides after the session anyway, but if anybody's keen to take a screen grab of that and send it to their CEO, then I'll give you a second to do it. So I think these quotes are also, these kind of studies are also interesting ones to look at as well, to have a think about what might be going on or what the research suggests about things. But again, they kind of say what I've said already, really, and they give you a few stats behind it. But the top piece talks about a meta-analysis that happened in 2018. So some of these studies are a little bit more recent. So I thought I would I'd gift you some stuff that isn't from the 90s when I when I feel like half of my education on this stuff was done. I promise I do look a bit further on from that. I don't just wear shell suits and read research from 1992 and trying to reclaim my youth on this sort of stuff. But the study at the top is a lovely one, a meta-analysis. Again, as psychologists, we love these because what they are not single studies, but they are reviews of a wide range of studies that have happened across this area to get the broad themes. So this is an analysis of over of 148 studies that was done with over 500,000 participants, and it indicates and it shows that very clear predictive relationship between cultures that are aligned and those that compared to those that aren't aligned to the organizational priorities on things and how that drives things forward. The biggest things I think that are its most predictive are things like innovation, attitudes to job, overall organizational performance consistently comes up, but there's also elements around things like customer satisfaction, productivity, profitability in there, and also you find that you get lower turnover, but typically the measures within that in the study show that you get lower regrettable turnover, which I think is the most important measure to look at within this sort of context. So I guess what I'm doing is saying here, it is important and it's something to look at. And there's a load of stuff that indicates the value of this when it comes to true organizational performance. I think the goal for us as HR leaders is about how do we get the language to support our operational leaders and our strategic leaders within our business to see beyond, I guess, the narrative that culture is just about trying to make people happy. Certainly in my work, I spend a lot of time in organizations with leaders, trying to support them and activate them in their roles for really leading in a way that supports an alignment to a culture that's going to drive high performance. And one of the initial reactions I see often from leaders whenever you talk to them about culture is a bit of a slump of the shoulders. And my sense is actually what the word culture does for a lot of people is it activates a sense of overwhelm because we've been conditioned to believe that what that means is about making our team happy. And so particularly when we're in difficult operating environments or we've had to make difficult decisions that feel counter to what feels right or reasonable for our colleagues. You're working with an organisation at the minute who's had to do a huge rationalisation around pensions and also do some restructuring, which means they've lost some people. So when we start to talk about culture, you can see people's eyes widen because they're thinking, you want me to make these people happy when they've got so many reasons to be angry with this organisation. And it's less about that for me. It's more about this piece around how do we create a deal, a relationship, a sense of partnership with our team that's about creating something together that allows us to be the best that we can be and get the best that we can out of work. It isn't about us taking on the mantle of taking everyone's problems and holding those to ourselves and trying to solve them individually. It's much more effective when we can create that sense of ownership and partnership to drive things forward. So let's have a conversation about what good actually looks like. So there's a few things here that I just wanted to share with you. So you're going to find in a bit that I'm going to say to you that there is no single cookie cutter good culture. You'll have noticed already in the research that I've quoted through the earlier pieces of the presentation that what we're talking about here is strong. I haven't said this particular a clan culture or a meritocracy or the like type of culture drives this type of performance. The research uses the language much more around kind of performance enhancing or aligned cultures driving things forward. So there is no single recipe for success. But what I would say is that, the data suggests that there are a few things that are really critical foundationally. How they play out in your context might be different. So again, there's not a cookie cutter way of doing this, but we'll help you kind of figure out about what the best one is for you in a moment. But a few things are really critical. Clarity of purpose. So do I really understand what my role is, how that contributes to the organisation and the overall mission? And as I mentioned earlier, that's an interesting one, but it's a little bit complex because for some people, connection to purpose can be at times in spite of the organisation rather than in service to the organisation. Any of those of you who work within service-led organisations, I'm sure you've experienced this. Particularly, we see it within the charitable and public services sectors at the moment, where there's been such a shrinking of funding and such a lift in need because of that, with different agencies kind of shrinking their sphere of influence on that, a big lift in need. That often what happens is that how the business, because they are businesses, need people to show up and deliver to allow that business to maximise its reach in those difficult conditions, is often counter to how people would prefer to do that to fulfil their own mission. So why they joined the organisation in the first place 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, or even 2 months ago, but fueled by a personal passion. So that sense of clarity of purpose, that connection, not just to the overall mission of the organisation, but to how people can be in service to supporting the organisation to deliver the maximum impact that it can, and understanding how their influence around that is critical is really important when it comes to that area. Constructive communication is also important. This area, focuses around ensuring that we think not just about, for leaders, I guess the best tip you can give is it's less about what I want to tell you, and it's more about what you need to know at this stage in your journey, your understanding. And so that piece around ensuring that we're connecting and communicating with our people to take them on the journey of understanding, truly understanding and accepting what we're talking to them about, rather than just telling them some stuff and hoping that some of it sticks, is important. And it's a skill within itself that is important that we build within our organisation. Involvement and empowerment are also critical elements of an effective culture, but this has to be, as with all the other areas, it's really critical that this piece is appropriate. So making sure that we don't just involve people for the sake of it. We don't try to empower people in situations where actually they need to be regulated, or there needs to be systems and processes in control. That means we're making a promise about involvement or empowerment that actually we can't deliver in practicality. So ensuring that we are giving people the scope of responsibility that is appropriate for the context that they're operating within, and they understand why and what types of load they're getting is really important. Psychological safety is critical, and I think this is one of the areas that's probably been tainted by its success in kind of getting into the fashionable narrative around these things. A lot of people focus on delivering individual interventions around psychological safety. It is such a critical element of an effective culture, but it's not something that you can deliver in isolation. And what this is really about is me having a sense of place, a sense of trust, a sense of belief in my own value within an organisation, and a sense that I will be accepted, supported and backed if anything happens. So really it's about a psychological contract that says, I trust you and will do the best that you can for me, and you trust me that I will do the best for the situation, my role and the organisation. And you can see how it's not something that you can do in isolation because it's driven by a huge number of behaviours, but it is a critical element of getting people to lift, to take risks, to push in additional effort, to do things that that might not work, but have the resilience and that sense of backing and support to stop something becoming a failure and instead allowing it to become a setback that they've worked through and pushed through. So it's a critical element to look at. And then other elements to look at are around recognition. Do our people really know that we notice what they're doing? And that's not just about the top performers and the going above and beyond awards, which I think are often actually really unhelpful. It's more about, do I see you? Do I understand you? Do I acknowledge the barriers that you overcome all day, every day to do what you need to do? And do I appreciate the effort and energy that you put in to show up and do a great job? Enablement links to this as well. Am I, as a leader or as an organisation, do we do our best to set you up to succeed? So do we notice where there are barriers in place that are unnecessary and we help you to take those down? Do we ensure that you have the skills, the resources and the opportunity to do the job that you need to do? And that isn't about just making everything easy and kind of giving people a smooth runway to be able to take off within their roles. It's really about noticing where unnecessary barriers or effort is having to be expended, and influencing that in a positive way to help your people to succeed. And I think the other piece that's really critical is learning and adaptability for all. So are we listening? Are we noticing? Are we having open conversations about what has and hasn't worked, whether that's in our relationships, in the way that we lead each other, connect with each other, deliver what's required, or in the way that our business runs? And are we adapting and evolving our approach to make those things move forward? And you can see how that area in particular underpins our ability to get all of those other areas working as we need to. So I think a big piece of culture is not about trying to implant perfection straight away and just expecting everything to click. It's about noticing what isn't working, what is working, and leaning into the stuff that's really working and making sure that we do more of that, and adapting the stuff that isn't working so that we can evolve that moving forward. And the whole system, I guess, being flexible enough to not expect for perfection from each other, but to notice in everyone playing a role where something isn't quite as aligned as it needs to be. So, you know, kind of spoiler alert, I've said this already. Ultimately, all of the research indicates that there is no single recipe for success. As much as we've been obsessed about getting these perfect models and trying to understand exactly what typology of culture you may have, actually, the research fundamentally says that strong cultures amplify performance when they're aligned to the organizational goals and context. So this is less about finding exactly the perfect model, and it's more about saying, what is it that we need to achieve in the next couple of years? What is the stuff that is going to make that easy, and what's going to make it really hard for us? And how do we need to create an environment that helps our people show up in a way that allows them to navigate that in a sustainable way and to the best of their ability? So what we're going to do now is talk about, well, okay, great, Paula, that's cool. So everything needs to be a bit, everything needs to be aligned and needs to work to our context. But how the hell do we do that? So let's have that conversation, shall we? So I expect that for you, the next question that you'll be asking is, how do we know what good is for us? So I think what we notice is that the initial instinct that we often have whenever we're looking to drive this idea of what does good look like for us is we go and ask our colleagues. We say, talk to us about what you need. And give us an indication of where you need to be. So forgive my rolly eye emoji, but I do have to control my eyebrows whenever people talk to me about what they get themselves into when it comes to this. Why is that? Is that because I believe colleagues don't have a valid voice? Absolutely not. But do I believe that the "you said we did" cycle of trying to meet colleagues' expectations is a really unhelpful one for us to get into, and one of the things that creates some of the biggest barriers to really leveraging culture effectively within our organisation? For sure, I absolutely believe that, and for a number of reasons. I'm just going to share with you an example, quite a bit of examples of feedback that we've seen people trying to base their getting in their cultural audits, that they're then trying to base their ideal culture on. So most audit processes, I'll be honest, most of them put employee experience at their heart. And in fact, a big chunk of the work that we do with clients is where they have done cultural audits with other organisations who've done a huge amount of colleague consultation, but rather than filter that through, what is it that colleagues are saying, and what does that mean in terms of their expectations versus business needs, etc., and how do we calibrate that? What they do is provide this ridiculous laundry list of things that we need to do to try and make people happy, when in fact some of those expectations might be totally outmoded or unreasonable, and there's other stuff that we can do to influence that. So a prime example I'll give on this is the second line there. An organisation that we worked with were asking us to help them filter their action plan. They'd grown very rapidly when in a couple of years, they'd gone from kind of about 1,500 people up to about 4,500 people. And one of the pieces of feedback that they were genuinely thinking about trying to action was that the chief executive should meet every new hire. So this business was growing by acquisition. It had been in one geography with a smaller number of people, now much larger, working across a range of different regions. And they were like, what do we do with this? Because people have said they want us to do it. And this, in the old days, the chief executive did used to meet every new hire, and somebody obviously wants us to go back to that, linking to leadership visibility. So for us, the conversation is less about, well, how do we make that happen, or how do we disappoint people about it, and more asking ourselves, well, why? Why do people think that that is an appropriate thing to expect or a reasonable thing to look for from the organisation? And it allows us to start to think about, well, there's a couple of things that really influence our culture. So some of it is about how we do things around here. So the extent to which the chief executive talks to every single new hire. But some of how people feel about work, what's driving their contentment, their happiness, but also their attitudes, is what they expect. So that piece of feedback is likely to have come from someone who worked within the organisation at a different phase of its life, whenever that was something that was possible, or has heard the story about that's something that the chief executive used to do. And they are transplanting what is now an unreasonable expectation for the organisation onto the current circumstances. So well, guess what I'm saying here is, if we purely work on colleague feedback without being curious about the bar that colleagues are setting, and is that a bar that we are willing to set our stall up to as an organisation? Is it one that we are able to fulfil the needs of, or is it one that we even want to fulfill, or is it even one that's helpful for us to fulfill, given where we're going as an organisation and how we need to perform to move things forward, is a really critical part of this. So if we ask people purely what they want, typically what they do is they just give us a slightly better version of where we are at the moment. Their brains can't imagine what a world different could be, because they're so soaked into the norms, the narratives, and the expectations of our current context. And I'm just going to share this example with you as a really kind of prime example. That organisation that I've just talked about, they, as I mentioned, were growing really rapidly, and we're planning, when we start to work with them, to double their footprint again in the next couple of years. So a huge amount of change, a huge amount of activation, a huge amount of growth needed within that organisation. And they were coming from a period of being very stable, a really kind of content, positive employer of choice type of organisation who had looked after their people a huge amount. What that had created, though, within their current culture was this sense of coziness. That's the only way I can describe it. Contentment. Everybody felt it was lovely. Everybody was really kind to each other and really nice on the surface level. Everybody was really friendly, and they seemed really helpful on things. But what that created over time was this kind of suppression of a focus on outcomes. People avoided having difficult conversations because they didn't want to be seen like that person, because the most important thing was to be friendly and helpful on things. So the business has kind of settled into this rhythm of succeeding as it had for quite a long period of time, and had then grown by acquisition. So it got bigger very quickly, but the core individuals and the core culture hadn't really shifted, and the other businesses it had acquired weren't dissimilar, actually. They all were pretty stable, and they came together as this group. But this growth that they wanted to do was going to be quite organic, and it needed some innovation, some sense of movement. There was a desire to move into different territories that there wasn't presence or an opportunity to grow by acquisition within those. So the type of behaviour that was needed for this next phase of growth was fundamentally very different from what they had at the time. So we worked with the executive team to talk about, well, what is it that you need moving forward? And they talked to us about the areas that are kind of greyed out. So they talked to us about preserving that friendliness. We need to be collegiate. We need to be supportive. They talked about being mission-led. So for them, that was about that purpose piece of really understanding that we can make a difference and growing in a way that really supports our positive mission and what we want to do moving forward. And they also talked about their bugbear of the fact that this coziness had led to a lack of accountability, really, because there wasn't that active performance management, because there weren't those difficult conversations. Often things would float or be left unsaid, and performance focus had suffered in each of the organisations over time. So we had a huge amount of discussion about where the business was going, what the goals were, what the strategic drive was, and those were the three areas that they were absolutely sure were the ones that the culture needed to represent moving forward. They totally missed out the bottom corner there, driven. They were so caught in this current cozy culture that they couldn't even imagine what a world could look like if actually their team around them shifted to a place of being more energized and ambitious. but they were trying to double the size of their business through organic growth in the next couple of years. So if they didn't have some sort of sense of positively motivating, stretched behaviors that were very focused around that sense of energy and ambition, they absolutely were not going to be able to deliver on their goals. So I guess what I'm doing here is just demonstrating how difficult it can be to get people, even our senior leaders, when we're linking into the strategic goals and priorities, which are often very aspirational, how difficult it is to get people out of just imagining the everyday being a little bit better. So when we're then asking our colleagues who aren't even connected in necessarily to that bigger piece, or what it means in terms of how this whole thing needs to shift to make that stuff happen, it can be really difficult to get to a place where that purely consultation feedback gives us what we need. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't use it. It just means that we structure it and we give it the right place in our conversation. And how we do that is we start to talk to organisations about this idea of building an achievable deal. So we're really focusing on the idea of understanding what our business needs when we think about what our business goals and priorities are. Stop thinking about our current world and how we could make that better, but let's actually have a conversation that's about designing the ideal kind of organisation, the ideal behaviour set, the types of mindsets, behaviours and priorities that we need to succeed in our strategic plan. So we set aside what the current looks like, and we have that conversation around, in an ideal world, if you were picking this up and designing it from scratch, what is it you need? And those become your core business drivers of understanding what the non-negotiables around what your culture needs to deliver are, to help you to start to create a context around what's acceptable when it comes to the talent expectations and goals. So once we've started to get that business driver framework, what we can then start to do is have a conversation with our teams about not what will make it a bit better around here, but having that performance-focused conversation that's saying, what do you need? How do you need to be treated? What do you need to feel? What do you need to experience and receive to allow you to be happy, healthy, and connected enough to deliver what this business requires in the next while? So we're keeping employee experience, we're keeping happiness at the heart, but we're framing that in the performance conversation. So we're starting to show our talent, we're showing our people that this deal isn't just about what can we do to make you happy, but we're thinking about actually what is it that we can also, or what is it that we can do together to create an environment where the business succeeds and you also succeed and thrive in that context. So I've just put some practical kind of questions and tips together on this to allow you to think about this. When it comes to the business needs, there's normally two types of questions that we're talking about around this really. One is really understanding what the piece around the performance drivers. So what are the key kind of strategic objectives that our business is working towards? Things like, what do our customers value in us? And what are the elements that we really need to think about that help us understand what is it that we're trying to achieve moving forward? But then linking that back to the realities of our operating context. So what is it that we need to overcome in order to make that happen? What is it that we need to unlock? What is it that our competitors are doing that might make that a bit difficult for us? Or how might AI influence how we need to evolve and adapt to make that happen, whatever it may be. But I think if we purely think about the performance drivers or those kind of strategic objectives in isolation, we're not giving ourselves the credit of recognizing that I don't know, launching a new product in a market that is not saturated with similar products is very different to launching a new product in a market that is saturated with very similar products. The strategies, the behaviours, etc., that you need to drive that forward are very different. So that piece around operating context is important. Again, I love an analogy. The analogy I often use with it is it's kind of like playing a computer game. The goal might always be the same, get to the end of the level, but the types of barriers or tasks that you need to complete to get through level 1 will be very different from level 13. So you've got to figure out what level you're playing and therefore what skill, mastery, behaviour, etc. you need to be able to turn up. So I think these questions will hopefully help you to nudge some of those conversations and really think about what you need from that. The final question there, I think, is a really critical one. How do we need our people to act in order to achieve our goals? So moving away from, if they just took a bit more responsibility, if they were just a bit more innovative or whatever it may be, into let's really look at this and think about what the 3 to 5 critical behaviours that we need to know are consistently showing up in our people, that our culture needs to unlock in our people to allow us to succeed, is a really helpful way to anchor and kind of set the priorities for how you move things forward. So let's talk a bit then about this piece around the talent drivers, because it's a little bit more complex. As I've mentioned, once we understand the business drivers, I kind of think about that as the fencing round what we're doing. You know, where we sit in the rest of the field comes down to the talent drivers. Where our people, you know, where our flock want to sit, depending on whether it's a sunny or a rainy day, etc., comes down to their preferences. But that piece around how they need to show up and what we need from them is pretty unnegotiable, because that's about what the business needs in order to deliver its ultimate purpose and goals. So the business drivers set the framing, but the talent drivers are just as critical. If we don't think about those, what we end up doing is this really top-down business need-led approach that doesn't really support us around creating the connection and the loyalty and the additional effort and energy that we need to move things forward. So the two have got to go together to create this sense of a balanced deal, which is realistic, results focused and fair. So I'm just going to share an example of a deal sheet that we've a section of a deal sheet that we've built out with the client. So for this organisation, they've gone through quite a significant shift after being acquired by a larger organisation. Things were feeling difficult for people, and it kind of felt to them like the organisation was getting everything that it needed after a significant period of integration. So we worked with them to support the business and the business leaders to set a new deal for this new future. It's like, this is what we're saying that we'll be able to give to you. This is what being part of this newer organisation means in terms of the benefits, and this is what we need from you to help that be able to work. So this idea of the deal sheet is about really fostering and creating that sense of partnership in order to move things forward. Again, give you a few tips around some different ways that you can think about this. So you might want to ask yourself some very specific questions about the type of talent that you want to either keep, attract, retain, motivate to move things forward. So thinking about things like, what's the ideal EVP or employee experience that you need to keep or secure the talent that you need moving forwards? What type of challenges do you notice whenever you need to secure the right people, and how does that need to be built into the deal to make sure that your talent wants to stay with you and it wants to perform? What forces of change might influence your colleagues' expectations at work? That's a big piece. You know, we've seen that post-COVID. We've seen that with the influx of the newer generations coming into the world of work. Fundamentally, their expectations about what good work looks like, our expectations about what good work looks like, is important. And I think some of the war around flexibility and hybrid working that we're seeing at the minute is business leaders in particular underestimating how much people value some elements that they didn't value previously, and overestimating their power around being able to just say, well, my preference is this, and then expecting to be able to keep people with the same level of energy, motivation, and capability, really. So we've got to make sure that we're nudging those conversations, and we're encouraging that sense of focus on how do we keep secure and activate our talent. I know it's more difficult in this sort of market. You know, it's always a much easier conversation when the job market is moving faster, because people see the empty bums on seats and they worry about that, and they're willing to consider it a little bit more. But I think as HR leaders, we have this real opportunity to talk about this piece around, are we getting the behaviours that we need from our talent, and how do we either keep and activate the talent that we've got to get those behaviours from them, or how do we bring in the right talent to allow us to be able to drive that forward? So again, just a few different ways that you can, a few different inspiration questions that will allow you to think about this and what you might want to do with it. So once you've got that information, once you know what your deal is, I think the next thing to really think about is how do we express these? And for those of you that have been around here a while, you'll know that values aren't my favourite thing, but I did think that it was helpful to kind of think about how you can express all of these elements together, whether you use the deal sheet. That's my preference, not the, I'm definitely going to show my preference when it comes to values on this. But if you don't use the deal sheet, thinking about, particularly if you have values and behaviours at the moment, how are we rounding those out to make sure that we link it to that broader cultural equation that we talked about earlier, that we're not just keeping those disjointed from what's actually happening within our organisation, but we're linking it to the everyday experiences and what that drives for our people, so it feels more relevant and clear to them about, well, why should I align with that value, or why should I demonstrate that behaviour? Because what it does is it helps me feel heard. It helps me know that my perspectives matters on things, and that I can be part of building something with other people. So if I do that to others and they do that to me, that's how it shows up. I think the final part here around then translating that into what it means in terms of results, I think is really critical. So how that links to product launches, the level of engagement that we get across our different sites when we do launch a new product, or our project alignment on things, how that moves. So, the example that we've used here is really around the idea of collaboration and linking the fact that actually if we activate and enable and encourage those behaviours of collaboration within our organisation and prioritise those, that we're much more likely to get projects moving faster, to be more effective, to be more high quality, because knowledge is shared, barriers are moved, cross-organisational barriers are overcome more efficiently, and we're able to drive results to make things move forward. So quite a lot, sorry, in 40 minutes, isn't it, to talk about through there. So I guess the main points that I would encourage you to take away from today are: culture is a performance, not a vibes issue. So have a real think about how do you express that? What does that look like? And use the kind of cultural equation that we talked about, which you can translate into the slide that I'm sharing with you here, to really start to nudge those conversations. So if you're here because people are asking you what a good culture looks like, go back and talk to them about this idea of behaviour alignment and activating what you need to drive the business results. Think about the foundations. So how far along are you on those areas? Is there stuff that you need to work on and confront to look at those? For sure. But make sure that you don't do that piece of work in isolation. Step back, do this piece of work that's around what does a good culture look like for us. And I think leadership teams are much more open to that conversation once they have got to the point where they understand the performance connection. So use the kind of question guides that we've given you there, if you wish to, around thinking about your business drivers, your talent drivers, and considering how you pull that into a deal that allows you to really start to define, this is the type of culture that we need to unlock those behaviours that we need for our business to move forward. Now, we have been doing some nerdy research on this ourselves, in terms of recognising that there is no single culture that works in a single context. But having done this for a few too many years, what we absolutely do know is that there are different typologies. So there are different kind of broad cultural modes that work depending on the type of organisation or organisational goals and operating context that you're working within. So I've just popped two QR codes up here for you. The one on the this side of the screen, the one on the left is focusing on our next masterclass, which is in January, where we'll be releasing our white paper, which is talking about those performance modes. So basically what we've done is defined 5 core performance modes, each related to a different kind of operating context and set of goals, and it broadly gives you a sense of these are the sort of things to work on. So it's a starting point for you if it feels like having those big conversations about business drivers and talent drivers and trying to integrate that all together yourself feels like too much. That's the place to start. We'll sign up for that masterclass. We'll talk you through the model, the different types, and you'll also get exclusive early access to the white paper and also the scorecard that we've put together that allows you to evaluate what ideal kind of performance mode is the right one for your culture, to give you that anchor point in terms of defining that. Really encourage you, if you think it'd be helpful, invite some of your senior leaders or CEO into that as well, and you can use the tool with them for that too. So the QR code there, sign up for that masterclass. We'd love to see you. It's on the 27th of January. And if you can't make it live, you'll get the recording. And the other thing to think about is if this is something that you want to start to work on independently, but you're just not quite sure where to start, or I've given you too much information today and you're like, what the hell do I do with this, Paula? As always, I will wholeheartedly recommend our digital course, the CCMK, which is the Culture Change Makers Kickstarter, which is 7 hours, give or take, of bite-sized content, which I'm sorry, it's listening to me on videos talking to you about this stuff, but it will take you module by module. There's 6 modules which look at things like defining your ideal culture, thinking about how you measure your current culture about against that, and action planning specifically around it. So that might be something else to have a look at too. Okay, so lots today, I know. As you'll know, this is absolutely my favourite topic. We've got a few minutes left, so if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask, I'm happy to kind of pick up anything in the Q&A, so please feel free to share anything. If not, I'll let you get back to the rest of your day. Thank you so much, everybody.